The evening lights of Dubai glowed softly against the tall glass walls of the most luxurious restaurant in the city. The place was filled with quiet music and whispers of rich guests, and among them sat a man whose presence could silence even the loudest room. He was the Sheikh CEO, a powerful businessman known for his strict eyes, calm voice, and a mind sharper than steel. People said when he entered a room, time itself slowed down, and tonight, something in his gaze said he was not here for pleasure. He walked in wearing a white thobe cleaner than snow, his golden cufflinks catching the light, and as he moved, every waiter froze. His reputation was legendary, not because he was cruel, but because he had a way of seeing through people, of testing their truth without warning. Some said he had built his empire by reading faces better than books, and that night, the test he had planned was not for business, it was for pride. The manager rushed to his side with a nervous smile, welcoming him, bowing slightly, offering the best table by the fountain inside the restaurant. The sheikh nodded once, sat down, and his eyes scanned the room like a king observing his court. Then his gaze stopped on a young waitress carrying a tray of glasses. She was not tall, not fancy. Her uniform was simple, but there was something in her eyes, something humble yet bright. Her name was Amina, a 22-year-old woman who had come from a small desert village. She had only been working here for 2 weeks, and every night she prayed that no customer would complain about her accent. She tried her best to learn Arabic, but it was not easy. Most of her guests spoke in fast words that tangled together like sandstorms, and she often smiled to hide her fear of making mistakes. That night, her fate changed without warning. When the manager whispered to her that the sheikh himself wanted to be served by her, she froze for a heartbeat, her breath caught in her throat. Why her? Out of all the experienced staff, why did he choose the newest, most nervous waitress? Her hands trembled slightly, but she nodded and walked slowly toward his table. Carrying the tray like it was made of glass wings, the sheikh looked at her with calm curiosity. His fingers tapping lightly on the table, his deep voice broke the silence. "You are new here, aren't you?" he asked, his words flowing like silk yet heavy with meaning. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes." "Sir?" she whispered, her voice soft but steady. The sheikh tilted his head slightly, a faint smile on his lips. "Tell me," he said. "Do you understand the language of this land?" The question sliced through the room like lightning. Every waiter stopped moving. Even the music seemed to fade into silence. It was not a simple question. It was a challenge, one that no foreign worker dared to face. Some looked at each other, whispering under their breath. They knew the sheikh's reputation. He had tested executives, scholars, and leaders, but never a waitress. Amina's heart pounded so fast she thought he could hear it. Her fingers tightened around the tray. Her mind screamed at her to stay silent, to walk away politely, but something inside her refused to bow. She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his, and for the first time in her life she did not feel small. She took a slow breath and said quietly, "Try me." The room gasped. The word was small but powerful. It rolled through the air like a storm. Even the sheikh's eyebrows lifted slightly. No one had ever dared to reply to him like that. For a moment, there was silence, long and heavy, the kind that made hearts beat louder than footsteps. And then the sheikh smiled, not with mockery, but with interest. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes shining with curiosity. "Very well," he said slowly, his voice calm like a lion before the hunt. "Let us see if you are ready." He began to speak in Arabic, but not the kind of Arabic used every day. He used deep poetic words, the kind taught in old books and holy verses, the kind that even locals found hard to follow. He asked her about truth, about patience, about the meaning of honor, each question more difficult than the last. The waiters stood at a distance. Holding their breath, some whispered prayers for Amina. Others shook their heads, believing this was the end of her job. But Amina kept listening, her eyes never leaving his face. She did not understand every word, but she caught the rhythm, the emotion, the pulse behind his speech, and something old stirred in her heart. She remembered her father's voice, teaching her by the fire, reading Arabic verses slowly, gently, telling her that words had souls if you listened close enough. The sheikh finished his question. His tone calm but expectant, he waited. certain she would stumble or freeze, but Amina's lips parted, and in a voice that surprised even herself, she began to reply. Her words were simple, but they carried warmth. She did not translate every word perfectly, but the meaning was clear. She spoke from her heart, not her memory. The sheikh blinked once, his face unreadable, and for a long moment, the only sound was the gentle splash of the fountain nearby. Every eye in the restaurant was on her, waiting for his reaction, and though no one spoke it aloud, everyone could feel it. Something powerful had just begun. The air in the restaurant felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Everyone waited in silence. The sheikh's deep eyes stayed fixed on Amina, his expression calm but curious, as if he had found something unexpected. The golden lights shimmered above them, and time seemed to slow. People whispered softly, wondering what would happen next. Amina stood straight, her heart beating fast, her hand still holding the tray close to her chest, her voice from before still echoing in the sheikh's mind. He leaned forward slightly, his fingers resting on the edge of the table, his tone smooth but powerful as he said, "Very well, if you understand Arabic, then let me test your heart." "Not your tongue." His words rolled through the room like thunder. The waiters at the corner froze in place, afraid to even breathe. Amina's eyes widened for a second, but then she nodded slowly, her lips pressed together, her fear turning quietly into courage. The sheikh began to speak again. This time his Arabic was faster, deeper, filled with old idioms and heavy meanings. His voice calm yet strong, he spoke of truth, of loyalty, of patience, and of respect. He asked her strange questions, each one sounding more like a riddle than a test. "Tell me, girl," he said, "if a man is rich but lies to the poor, what is his worth?" His eyes did not blink as he watched her think. She looked down, her fingers trembling slightly. Everyone thought she would give up, but then she lifted her gaze and said gently, "A man who lies loses more than gold. He loses himself." The sheikh's hand stopped moving for a moment. His face unreadable, he had not expected that answer. His lips twitched slightly as if fighting a smile, and then he asked again, this time faster. "If patience is tested by pain and truth by time, then what tests kindness?" Amina's breath caught for a second. The question danced in her head like fire. She closed her eyes, hearing her father's voice again. That soft whisper from her childhood saying, "Kindness is only real when no one sees it." She opened her eyes and replied softly, "Kindness is tested when no one is watching." The restaurant filled with silence again, the kind of silence that made hearts stop. The sheikh's eyes flickered with something new. Respect, perhaps, or confusion, no one knew. He leaned back slowly, his gaze deep and thoughtful. For the first time, it seemed like he was the one being studied. Amina stood still, waiting quietly, her hands no longer shaking. The other staff looked at her with amazement. This young woman from a small village had faced one of the richest men in Dubai and had not broken. But the sheikh was not done yet. He looked down at the golden ring on his finger, turning it slowly, then said, "Tell me, why should a leader respect those who serve him?" His voice was calm but sharp, as if every word carried weight. Amina looked at him for a long moment, then spoke slowly, her voice trembling but steady. "Because service is not weakness, sir. It is trust, and without trust, even a king eats alone." A sound escaped from somewhere, a small gasp. Perhaps from one of the waiters. The sheikh's eyes darkened for a second, not with anger, but something deeper, something that made his jaw tighten. He looked around the restaurant, saw the faces staring, then looked back at Amina, his expression softening ever so slightly. "You speak well," he said in a low tone. "Too well for a waitress." The words made her heart jump. She did not know if it was praise or warning. She bowed her head slightly, saying nothing. The sheikh tapped the table once, then asked in a quieter voice, "Where did you learn to speak this way?" Amina hesitated, her eyes moving toward the floor, the past flashing before her mind. Dusty roads, an old man reading under a lamp, the sound of wind against their small house. She whispered, "My father taught me before he passed away." The sheikh's expression froze. The mention of her father's death made something shift inside him. Though he did not show it, he asked gently, "And what did he do?" She smiled faintly. He worked for a man he respected, a man who once promised to remember him. Her voice trembled slightly. He believed that even great men could keep their word. The sheikh looked down. His fingers stopped tapping, his eyes distant for a moment, as if searching in the shadows of memory. He almost asked for the man's name, but something held him back. The sound of the fountain filled the silence again, its rhythm calm and endless. Amina stood quietly, unaware that her words had touched a buried wound in the heart of the man before her. The manager nearby looked ready to step in, to end this strange test before it went too far. But the sheikh raised his hand slightly, stopping him without a word. His voice, when he spoke again, was softer, almost thoughtful. "You speak with wisdom," he said, "but wisdom alone does not feed the poor, does it?" Amina shook her head slowly, her eyes gentle. "No, sir," she said, "but it feeds the soul." The sheikh looked at her for a long time, the golden lights reflecting in his eyes, and then, for the first time that night, he smiled. Not a polite smile, not a powerful smile, but a quiet, human smile, the kind that said something had changed inside him. Around them, the restaurant began to breathe again. People whispered. Glasses clinked softly, but no one could forget what they had just witnessed. It was not just a test of language anymore. It was something deeper, a battle of hearts wrapped in words. And though the sheikh had started the test, it now felt like he was the one being tested instead. The night air outside was calm, but inside the restaurant, hearts were racing. The conversation between the sheikh and Amina had turned into something no one could have predicted. Whispers filled the corners of the room. People leaned in, trying to hear every word, yet too afraid to breathe too loud. The sheikh's eyes were no longer cold. They held something heavy, something that looked a lot like memory. He looked at the young waitress standing before him, her hands folded neatly, her eyes down. But her voice steady, the way she spoke reminded him of someone long gone, someone whose voice had once carried the same calm truth. The sheikh did not speak for a moment. His fingers traced the edge of his golden ring, his thoughts drifting back to a time when he was not yet powerful, not yet feared. He had been young, full of mistakes, full of promises he could not keep. He asked softly, almost like a whisper, "You said your father taught you Arabic before he passed away. What was his name?" The question hung in the air like smoke, thick and slow. Amina lifted her eyes just enough to meet his gaze and said quietly, "Abdullah Karim." The name struck the sheikh like a sudden wind. He froze his face. Losing all its calm for a brief second, he blinked slowly, as if trying to remember whether the name was real or a ghost from the past. The waiters watching saw the change in him. His proud shoulders seemed to lower just a little, his breathing heavier than before. He repeated the name under his breath, "Abdullah Karim," as though speaking it could bring back a memory buried too deep. Amina did not notice the storm inside him. She kept talking, her words flowing like a river. "My father worked for a company years ago. He used to drive for a man of great honor. He respected him deeply. He said that man once promised to help our family, but we never heard from him again after my father died. I tried to continue his dream. I wanted to learn. I wanted to speak the language he loved." The sheikh's chest tightened. His throat felt dry. That promise he had made so many years ago flashed through his mind like a sharp blade. He remembered the man, a loyal driver who had saved his life once. During a desert journey when a sandstorm had trapped them both, the driver had given him his last bottle of water, refusing to drink himself, saying, "You are my leader. You must survive." The sheikh had promised that day to take care of the man's family, to give them a better life. But time and success had made him forget. Now standing before him was that man's daughter, humble, dressed in a simple uniform, yet speaking with more grace than most leaders. The sheikh felt something shift inside. His chest guilt, perhaps regret, maybe even shame. He took a deep, slow breath, his eyes softening as he looked at her again. The restaurant was quiet, every pair of eyes fixed on the two of them. No one dared interrupt the strange moment unfolding. The fountain beside them kept its steady rhythm like a heartbeat in the background. The Sheikh's voice broke the silence again, low but trembling with emotion. "Your father was a good man," he said carefully, his tone softer than anyone had ever heard it before. "He once did something I can never repay." Amina tilted her head slightly confused. She asked gently, "You knew him, sir?" The Sheikh nodded slowly, the golden light reflecting off his eyes like tears that refused to fall. "Yes, I knew him better than you think. He saved my life long ago. In the desert I owe him more than words can say." Amina stood still, unable to believe what she was hearing, her hands trembling again, but this time from shock, not fear. "You are the man he spoke of, aren't you?" she whispered, her voice almost breaking. "The one he trusted, the one he called generous." The Sheikh closed his eyes for a moment as if the words were too heavy to face. When he opened them again, his gaze was full of regret. "Yes, I am that man, and I broke his trust. I forgot his kindness while chasing my success. I forgot the promise I made." For a moment, the silence between them felt sacred, the kind that carries both pain and forgiveness. The waiters looked away, some with tears in their eyes. The manager pretended to fix his tie, but his hands shook slightly. Amina lowered her head, her voice trembling but calm. "My father always said forgiveness is the gift of the strong. He never blamed anyone. He only wished I would one day meet someone who remembered him." The Sheikh's heart ached. He wanted to speak, but words refused to come. He stood slowly, his chair sliding back, making a soft sound that echoed across the room. He looked at her with a mix of pride and sorrow. "I remember him now, and I will not forget again," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Amina blinked back, tears unsure if she should smile or cry. Her hands clutched the edge of the tray like an anchor. The Sheikh turned to the staff around and said in a firm voice, "This woman's father was a man of honor, and she carries his spirit within her. She deserves respect, not tests." The crowd of staff and guests murmured softly. Admiration filled the air, and though Amina felt small under the attention, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The Sheikh looked at her once more, his eyes kind this time. "You have reminded me of a promise and of what it means to be human. Thank you." Amina bowed her head, whispering, "Thank you, sir," her voice breaking into a quiet sob. The restaurant seemed brighter for a moment, as if the walls themselves had heard her father's name and smiled. The Sheikh sat back down slowly, his thoughts distant, but his heart awake for the first time in years, and somewhere deep inside him, he knew this was only the beginning of something greater, something that would soon reach far beyond this room. The Sheikh sat in silence, his fingers resting on the golden ring that once belonged to his father, the same ring that Abdullah had admired long ago when they were lost together in the desert. The weight of memory pressed hard against his chest. His thoughts ran like sand through an hourglass, unstoppable and heavy the faces around. The restaurant blurred as his mind returned to that one day when a humble driver saved his life. Amina stood quietly in front of him, not knowing whether to stay or walk away. Her heart pounding in her chest, the crowd of guests and staff still whispering, softly, their eyes moving between the powerful Sheikh and the young waitress. The air was thick with something that felt like fate. She could not explain why, but she felt her father's presence in that room as if his unseen hands were guiding this moment. The Sheikh's voice broke the silence, low and deep like thunder before rain. "Abdullah was more than a driver to me. He was my brother in the desert. He taught me courage. He gave me his last water when I was dying of thirst, and I swore on my name that I would take care of his family. I swore it before the stars." His voice trembled for a brief second. His eyes, looking at Amina like a man seeing his past, rise before him. Amina's eyes filled with tears, her lips shaking as she whispered, "My father always spoke of you, sir. He said you were a man of great heart. He never once said a bad word about you, even after he fell sick. Even when he struggled, he said you would remember one day." She paused, her hands pressing against her chest as if trying to hold the memory in place. "And now you have." The sheikh looked down his throat, tight with guilt. He had spent years building towers of glass and steel. Yet he had forgotten the one man who had built his strength with kindness. He felt smaller than ever before, smaller than the young girl standing humbly in front of him. The world outside could see him as a king, but tonight he saw himself as a man who had broken his word. He stood slowly, his chair making a soft sound against the marble floor. Everyone in the restaurant turned toward him, waiting, afraid to move, afraid to speak. His white robe shimmered under the lights. His tall figure casting a shadow across the floor, he looked at Amina and said in a voice, steady but filled with emotion, "Your father saved my life, Amina, and today you saved my soul." The crowd fell silent again. Even the fountain seemed quieter as his words spread across the room. The manager lowered his head, unable to hide the emotion. On his face, the waiters looked at one another, unsure whether they were allowed to smile or cry. The moment felt sacred, a memory being written in real time. The sheikh continued, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "From this day you are not just a waitress. You are under my care. I owe your father that much and more." Amina shook her head, tears streaming down her face, her voice trembling. "Sir, I don't want anything for myself. My father would not have wanted that. He always said we must earn what we receive." Her humility struck him like another truth he had long forgotten. He took a slow breath, his eyes wet, though he would never admit it, and said, "Then earn it with me, work beside me, learn from me. I will teach you what your father wanted you to know. The world needs people who speak with honesty and heart." Amina's lips parted in shock. Her body frozen for a moment. She could not believe what she was hearing. The same man who once ruled boardrooms and empires now speaking to her as an equal. The other staff began to whisper again, but this time the whispers carried warmth, not fear. They spoke of destiny and kindness and miracles that happen when words meet truth. The sheikh turned to the rest of the restaurant, his voice rising strong and full. "Let this night remind us that no job is small, and no heart is unworthy of respect. A man's worth is not in his wealth, but in his word, and tonight this young woman reminded me of mine." His words rolled through the hall like music, touching every soul in the room. Amina bowed, slightly unable to hold her tears, her chest heavy with pride and disbelief. She could almost hear her father's laughter somewhere near the fountain, like an echo from the past. The sheikh placed his hand gently on her shoulder and whispered, "You have your father's courage, Amina, never lose it." The guests began to clap slowly, one by one, their applause growing louder until the room filled with sound. Cameras flashed softly, phones were raised quietly. People wanted to capture the moment, not knowing that soon it would travel far beyond those walls into the world, beyond Dubai, across oceans and borders. The story of the waitress and the sheikh would soon live in hearts everywhere. The sheikh took a step back, looking at her one last time, before he sat again. His mind still heavy, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. He looked up at the ceiling where golden light reflected like stars and whispered under his breath, "Abdullah, your daughter has your strength." Amina looked at him and smiled through her tears, saying quietly, "And you have your promise again, sir." The restaurant returned to life, but nothing felt the same. Laughter returned softly, music played again, but beneath it all there was a hum of something deeper, something that whispered that some meetings are not chance but destiny dressed in ordinary clothes. The sheikh and the waitress stood on two sides of life, yet in that single moment they had met in the middle where truth lives. And as the night drew to an end, no. One knew that the story they had witnessed was only the beginning of a miracle that the world would soon see. The night that had begun like any other had turned into something unforgettable. The restaurant still shimmered under the golden lights, but the energy inside had changed forever. Where once there had been fear and whispers, now there was awe and warmth. People spoke softly about what they had seen, their eyes still wide as if afraid the moment might disappear if they blinked too long. The sheikh sat quietly at his table deep in thought, while Amina stood nearby, her hands still trembling from everything that had happened, her heart trying to believe it was real. Unnoticed by both of them, a young guest sitting near the corner had recorded everything on his phone from the first question to the sheikh's last words. The camera had captured the emotion, the courage and the truth that filled the room. He looked at the video, his hands shaking with excitement, and whispered to his friend, "The world has to see this." They uploaded it that same night with the title, "The Waitress Who Silenced a Sheikh." Within hours, it began to spread faster than wildfire across every platform. By morning, the sun rose over Dubai, but Amina's life was no longer the same. Her phone buzzed endlessly as messages poured in from strangers across the world. People from different countries wrote about her bravery, her kindness, and the way she spoke to the sheikh, not with fear, but with respect. The video had reached millions overnight. The comment sections filled with words of praise. People said her voice carried more power than money, her calmness more beauty than diamonds. At the restaurant, the staff gathered around there, phones unable to believe the numbers climbing higher and higher. The manager who once doubted her stood in disbelief, shaking his head, whispering, "This is history." Reporters began calling the restaurant, wanting interviews, wanting to know who the mysterious waitress was who spoke wisdom to one of the richest men in Dubai. Amina, however, sat quietly in the small staff room. Her hands folded, her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of gratitude. She whispered softly, "Papa, they heard me." Meanwhile, the sheikh sat in his office high above the city, his view stretching across towers of glass and gold. His phone, too, was flooded with messages, some from friends, some from journalists, others from business leaders asking about the video. His assistants rushed in holding tablets showing headlines. Sheikh's test turns into life lesson. The humble waitress who taught a king. The sheikh watched the video in silence, his own face on the screen, his own words echoing back to him. But what struck him most was Amina's calm eyes and the strength behind her trembling voice. He leaned back in his chair, his hand covering his mouth as emotion filled his chest. It was strange to see himself through the world's eyes, not as a leader or a billionaire, but as a man being taught humility by a girl from a small village. He whispered quietly to himself, "Abdullah, your daughter has done what I never could. She reminded me what matters most." By afternoon, the story had reached. Television networks' reporters stood outside the restaurant filming live segments. The video, now translated into many languages, had become a symbol of dignity and respect. People began using hashtags about equality and humanity. Children in schools repeated Amina's words about kindness being tested when no one watches. Universities discussed her courage as an example of emotional strength, and leaders across the region shared the clip as a reminder of humility. Inside the restaurant, Amina felt overwhelmed. She had never been on television, never been famous, and the thought of millions watching her face made her nervous. She told the manager she wished she could hide, but deep inside she knew this was not just her story. It was her father's dream living again through her words. The other waiters comforted her, saying she had become the pride of all who worked with honor. Late in the evening, the sheikh arrived again. The restaurant lights dimmed slightly as people recognized him. This time his entrance felt different. There was no tension, no fear, only quiet respect. He walked straight toward Amina, who stood near the same table where everything began. His face calm, his eyes warm. He said softly, "Amina, the world has seen what I saw last night, and they see what your father saw years ago, a heart that speaks truth." Amina lowered her gaze, her cheeks red, her voice small. "I did not mean for it to go viral, sir. I just wanted to honor my father." The sheikh smiled. Faintly, "And you did more than that. You honored his spirit and reminded the world that language is not just words. It is respect. It is courage." He paused, then handed her a letter written on golden paper, sealed with his personal emblem. "This is for you." Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside were words written in Arabic, simple yet powerful, an offer for full education, sponsored by the sheikh himself, and a position in his company. After graduation, her eyes filled with tears, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you, sir." He looked at her and said, "Live well, Amina. That will be thanks enough." The moment was captured once again by someone in the restaurant, and soon it became the second viral wave